Hello again, and welcome to Chapter 8, Peers and Friends. Now, I've already alluded to the fact that for the majority of adolescents in Western society, this stage of life includes a shift from spending most of their time with their family to spending more time with people their own age, their peers and friends, which are two different things, by the way. Friends are people you're friends with, peers are people who you are similar to. Now, for some adolescents, this will be a major extreme change so that they essentially sleep and eat in home, and that is the extent of their contact with their families. For others, it's going to be much more minimal, and the amount of time they spend with non-family members doesn't really increase by too much. It increases, but not too much. And then we can be anywhere in between on this spectrum. The kind of society and culture you live in, whether it is a collectivistic or individualistic society, will directly influence, of course, if not outright determine, where a person will find themselves within this shift. Now, Canada and the US are Western developed countries, and in a country like ours, we typically see a noticeable difference in the amount of time spent with family during adolescence because it decreases, which also typically includes a decline in the degree of warmth and closeness in that parental adolescent relationship. And again, this is a tendency, it's not an absolute. This is not true for every single person. And the degree to which the parental relationship cools off will vary considerably. Now, keep in mind, when I say that it cools off and that warmth and closeness decreases, it doesn't mean that the relationship with parents becomes horrible, just that it changes a bit, it shifts. I'm sure everybody knows somebody who complained all the time about their parents when they were in high school. They seemed to fight with them a lot. They didn't seem to be able to get along regarding anything, and they always made really negative comments about their parents. And then you might have known some people who seemed to have an absolutely great relationship with their parents. Even if they were not always doing things together, they seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company and to get along. They generally seemed to have a pretty good relationship. And then again, there was every degree of variation in between. Now, remember what's happening during this stage of life in Western countries. During adolescence, that young person is trying to broaden their social world outside of their family. They're making friends. They're meeting people that have nothing to do with their family, whether that's at school or through getting a job or some activity. They're spending more and more time away from their family, independent of them. So in other words, they increasingly have their own life separate from their family. Think about children starting school. Generally, it's from the age of 5 to 6 that children in most countries begin to spend their days in school, supervised by adults who have no personal relationship with them and their peers. Now, one of the effects of this standardized schooling is that it's the beginning of separating children from their families. It's the beginning of encouraging children to develop a sense of independence and a sense of identity separate from their family, apart from their family. In Ontario, this begins even earlier because we have junior kindergarten and now early learning before junior kindergarten. And I know most people don't usually think of elementary school in that way, but that is certainly one of the effects. And this then continues every year, increasing even more during adolescence when young people spend even more leisure time outside of school with others their age. I would also include the effect of electronics in this regard. That increases the amount of time spent with peers substantially. Maybe not in person, but communicating with them. And it isn't just a theory that time away from family increases during adolescence. It's a fact. Many studies have demonstrated this. As your text indicates, the amount of time spent with family decreases by about half from 5th to 9th grade, and then it decreases even more from 9th to 12th grade. And again, this doesn't even take into account the effect of electronic communication, which is pretty much standard these days with cell phones. Now, something else that changes during adolescence is that this isn't just a time when time with peers increases. It's when time with other sex friends increases. In other words, as young people begin to date and have relationships, they spend more time with the opposite sex. Now, unfortunately, this research doesn't take into account people who are not heterosexual, which would thus make it a great area for future research. Your textbook cites one example of research in the US with adolescents aged 13 to 16. And it says that the average time spent with parents was 28 minutes per day at 13, increases, whereas the average with friends was 103 minutes per day. So that's quite a difference. Now, in this part of the textbook, it mentions a whole ton of research. It throws a lot of numbers at you all at once. What I want you to focus on is summarizing it, what do all these numbers mean? They clearly indicate that it's not just a stereotype that as young people grow up, they become more attached to their peer group. That young people typically spend more time with their peer group and less with family. That they tend to communicate more with their peer group. So it's true. And we can correctly infer then that the influence of their peer group increases dramatically during adolescence. So just at the time there's a whole whack of development and change going on, just at the time a young person makes a whole lot of personal decisions, the influence of their family usually declines, or at least is affected by another group. They're still going through puberty, so there's still a lot physically going on. They're going through sexual development and hopefully becoming more mature in that area. They're still going through cognitive and emotional maturation. So let's keep all these points organized. During adolescence, young people typically spend more time with friends and peers, more time with opposite sex friends and peers, and this means they're going to have more influence on them. But it isn't just spending time with them, and it isn't just being influenced by them more. An adolescent will actually develop a greater dependence on them. And maybe it's just me, but I think whenever somebody hears the word intimacy, they automatically think of something romantic or sexual, when actually the word intimacy in this context refers to a feeling of emotional closeness, of having a bond with somebody. And typically, in modern individualistic cultures like ours, an adolescent relies on their friends to provide them an emotional bond, to provide them that intimate connection, more than they did as children. The text talks about a study that occurred that compared the quality of adolescent friendships, the quality of adolescent relationships with friends and their parents. And that was called Adolescent Relations with Mothers, Fathers, and Friends. And what it did was it administered a survey to about 1,000 young people aged 12 to 19, so it had a pretty good sample size. And what it did was also analyze the findings of 8 other surveys about peer and family relationships. And what this did was it showed them that over 90% of these adolescents indicated they had at least one close friend. And in addition, about 70% agreed with these statements. My close friends understand me better than my parents. I feel that I learn more from my close friends than I do from my parents. And I'm more myself with my close friends than with my parents. And the same study also looked at whether an adolescent would prefer parents or their friends for people they would talk to about various issues. Now, take note that parents are still preferred for issues related to education or their future occupation. So it's not that parents have no role whatsoever, but when it comes to personal issues, friends were preferred overwhelmingly. So career goals, how they're doing in school, attitudes towards marriage. But when it comes to views on sex, for example, 80% prefer to talk to their friends, which I don't think we'll find surprising. Feelings about the opposite sex, problems with the opposite sex. So it's not that parents are shut out, but they begin to depend on their friends more for certain subjects. Your text specifically cites a few more studies. In one, fourth graders said that their parents were their main source of support, but by seventh grade, same gender friends were just as important. And by 10th grade, same gender friends had become more important than parents. So again, these are a lot of numbers, a lot of individual studies. What can we summarize here from all of these? We can say that there doesn't seem to be any significant cultural differences regarding the tendency for your friends to grow in importance in several ways as you move from childhood to adolescence and from adolescence into emerging adulthood in modern individualistic countries. Now, the amount of difference, how much the family recedes, may vary from culture to culture, but they do always recede in some way that is usually the same for everybody. And even though the direct influence of parents diminished during adolescence, parents do continue to shape their adolescents' peer relationships in a variety of indirect ways. For example, something as simple as where you live, because where you live determines where you go to school, because we all attend the school in your neighborhood, the neighborhood school. So think about the different high schools available where you grew up. If you went to a different one, you would have had an entirely different peer group, which means your high school experience may have been totally different. So it would have been different regarding, obviously, who you came into contact with on a daily basis, who you hung around with, who your actual friends were, how many friends you had. Since we're so affected by people's perceptions of us, it might have changed how you think about yourself, your self-esteem, your feeling of self-worth. So attending a different high school would likely have changed who you did or did not date. It maybe even have affected what you chose to do after high school, since your peer groups will have an effect on your interests. So in deciding where to live, parents are directly affecting who might be a part of your peer group. They determine the pool of people you have to choose your friends from. Now, some parents also actively manage their adolescents' friendships by encouraging a friendship with somebody or a dating relationship with somebody, or maybe doing everything they possibly can to stop it. Maybe your parents made it clear to you that they didn't like somebody. They thought they were a bad influence. Maybe they told you straight out, you're not allowed to hang around with them. Maybe your parents told you they didn't want you dating somebody or actually forbid you from seeing somebody. Or if they liked somebody, they let you know that you had their approval, whether you wanted their approval or not. So think back to the variations in parenting styles, which can in turn affect adolescent friendship choices. In a study of 3,700 adolescents, those parents who encouraged academic achievement and who monitored their adolescents' activities were found to have higher grades and lower levels of illicit drug use. So grades and illicit drug use were in turn related to adolescents' choices of friends. If your parents are really concerned with you maintaining high grades, you're going to be drawn to the same qualities in the people you hang around with. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Now, let's relate this to something that's pretty common in Northern Ontario. In Northern Ontario, if you have parents who are really pro hockey, watch it at home, talk about it year round, play pickup games at home all the time, take their kids to can skate when they're really little and have them in Timbits hockey as soon as they can, kind of a stereotypical hockey family. And adolescents' choices of friends is going to be related to this. You can hang around, or who you hang around with is going to be affected by this. So your parents will still have an effect on who your friends are, directly and indirectly.